Hi, so it's Friday evening, day before brew day, and so what I do the day before is I crush the grains and I make a yeast starter. I'm going to crush the grains outside because it gets pretty dusty, and after I do that I'll come back inside and we'll go through the yeast starter. So what I use for crushing the grains is a Corona style grain mill that I got for about $25 on Amazon. And that's a lot cheaper than a lot of the stuff you can find in homebrew shops if you want to go the cheap route like I do. So what I do to set it up is I make sure that the spacing here is even all the way around. And then what I do is I use an old debit card, and it's the width of the debit card. I squeeze it down and then I back it off a half turn on this adjustment right here. And that usually gets the grain crush that I want. And to turn the mill, what I've done is I went out and I got a bolt that fits in there. I got a socket adapter for my electric drill and just throw a socket on the end of it. So when you actually get it going, just like that, really easy. The hopper is filled. It holds about 2 1/4 pounds of grain. So for a typical recipe, you're going to have to go through the process, 5 times or so. I'm making a double IPA today, so this is going to be a little more than that, but still not too bad. So when I use that credit card thickness minus half turn setting on the mill, this is what I'm looking for. You can see that the grain husks are split into, halves, thirds, quarters, whatever, exposing all the good stuff on the inside, which is what you need to brew. So now the grains are milled and it's time to get going with the yeast starter. So when I make a yeast starter, I use a nice 1 liter flask. I start off with about 950 milliliters of hot tap water and a half a cup of dried malt extract. So getting started here, I turn the burner up to high, start heating the water, and then I'll start stirring in the dried malt extract in just a second. So you can see here I am just lightly pouring the dried malt extract in. This helps so it doesn't get all clumpy. It's just easier to stir it in if you pour it in just a little bit at a time. And if it does start to get clumpy, you can always use a whisk to break that up. I feel like I'm doing my own cooking show here. Alright, so this just started boiling, and I'm going to show you how it starts to foam up. So if you have a gas stove, you can just turn the gas down a little bit. If you have an electric stove and it starts to boil over, just pick it up real quick and give yourself time to turn the stove down. I usually go down to about a medium heat. I don't know if you can see that very well, but that's what works for me. And I let this go uncovered to make sure that it's going to stop foaming up and so it doesn't boil over, because once you cover it, the boil over just happens by surprise. You won't see it coming. So anyway, I turn it down to a medium heat and I use my ghetto pot cover, which is just a pan. Cover that up and we will let that boil for about 15 minutes. Okay, so 15 minutes is up. I turned off the burner, the boiling is done. Now I'm going to transfer this into the Erlenmeyer flask. I'm going to put it in an ice bath and let it cool. I usually let it cool for about 30 minutes. Try to get it close to room temperature. I transfer it using a measuring cup. Probably be easier with a funnel, I understand that. It'd probably be easier if I actually boiled the starter in the Erlenmeyer flask. But when I think about cooling it down, I don't want to also have to cool down glass as well as the liquid, so I think it probably cools down a little quicker. So remember, sanitizing things is important. I always have a solution of Star San mixed up in a spray bottle ready to go. So for the Erlenmeyer flask here, I'm going to spray down into it. Get it on the edges too, just in case. And also going to spray the inside of the aluminum foil top that's going to go on. When you're chilling anything down, if you just leave it standing still, it'll take a lot longer. A good idea every once in a while is just to go just kind of stir that cold ice water bath down. And also every once in a while just take the flask and give it a swirl, just making sure you're getting the heated liquid out to the edges so it can cool down quicker. So now it's cooled down enough, I'm going to pour the yeast in. I cut off the top of the yeast package already. Of course, I sanitized the blades on the scissors, sanitized the outside of the yeast package by spraying the sanitizing solution on it, and we are ready to go. The challenge here is not to spill it too much, or hopefully not at all. Then I put the aluminum foil cover back on, and a lot of places will read to put it on loosely, but I do it a little bit tight because in the summer I have some fruit flies flying around the house, especially when I have bananas out, so I want to make sure the flies don't get in there. So anyway, yeast is in, give it a swirl around, and let it sit at room temperature until you're ready to pour it into the brew. Okay, so that's it for the night before brew day stuff that I have to do. I milled the grains, I got the yeast starter ready, and I know I just said that when you get the yeast starter ready to go to let it sit there until you're ready to pour it into the fermenter. But it's probably a good idea whenever you walk by to just pick it up and give it a little bit of a swirl. That just helps keep as many yeast cells in contact with sugars as possible, which is a good thing. You could also use a stir plate, but I don't have one of those, so I just got to pick it up and swirl it. So, like I said, that's it for tonight. The next step goes on tomorrow morning. I'll see you then. Hey, good morning. It's Saturday, which means it's brew day. I set everything up outside. I've got the water heating for the mash, so let's go take a look. Okay, so this is what I got. Have an actual turkey fryer with the burner there. I got that at Bass Pro for about $50. Hooked up to the propane tank, of course. And then my mash tun is just a Coleman cooler. I use the stainless steel part of a washer hose to act as the filter, and then on the outside I just got a ball valve, and that goes right through where the drain plug used to be. So I just poured the hot water into the cooler. I heated it up to about 180 degrees. What I do is I let it sit for 10 minutes. It usually drops about 10 degrees, and then I can do the the finer adjustments to get the temperature of the water where I want to before I pour the grain in. With the beer I'm brewing today, I want the starting temperature of the mash to be about 155 degrees. And with this setup, it means that I need the water to be about 12 or 13 degrees above that. So 167, 168, and as you can see, we're a little bit warm, so I need to adjust it with cool water. It's always better to have it a little hotter. I just find that easier to fix the temperature throwing some cold water in. So if the water is within a couple of degrees, I just stir it, and that eventually gets it down. But in this case, it was about 6 degrees too warm. So what I do is I scoop out 2 cups of the hot water here, and then I just go and get some cold water from the faucet, and that gets me pretty close. So what I just did there is I took a measuring cup, pulled out 2 cups of the hot water, Went into the sink and got some cold water to mix it in, and now I'm right down to where I need to be. So now I'm just stirring this up to get any clumps out of the way. You want the grain to be in contact with the water, so if it's clumped up in a little dough ball, stuff on the inside won't touch the water. So just stir it up and get it all distributed evenly. Okay, so I just put the grains into the cooler with the water. I started a timer for 60 minutes, that's how long I mash. And what I usually do is about 10 minutes in, I take a temperature reading, and that's what I record as my initial temperature for the mash. So this is 10 minutes in, I'm taking the temperature of the mash. Temperature's a little lower than I expected, but that's fine. Anything within a couple degrees I'm okay with. So 30 minutes into the mash, I stir it up, and then take a temperature reading. Okay, so that's pretty good. Only lost about 1.5 degrees, which is perfectly fine with this setup. So the 60-minute mash is done, and now I'm just stirring it up, and in a second I'm going to start recirculating the wort to try to get the grains to settle down, because the grains act as part of the filter. So you can see there, maybe you can see, there's a lot of grain particles floating around in there, and the point is to try to recirculate this enough so you mostly eliminate that grain floating around. So after cycling through that process maybe a dozen times, this is pretty much what we're looking for. Is nice clean wort so we can get the good stuff into the boil kettle. So what I'm doing is called batch sparging, which means you drain out whatever's in the mash tun first, you dump more water in, stir it up, and then drain it again. To save time, once I start draining the second batch, I guess, I start heating the kettle again. So I turn it on high. It just saves a little time in getting it to a boil. dump the spent grains into my compost pile. It's not composted yet, but when it does compost, I end up using this in my veggie garden in the spring. So it's just barely starting to boil, so I keep an eye on that, and I keep my hand on the control over here to make sure that it doesn't boil. See, once it gets going, the foam starts to rise up pretty quick. And I keep adjusting the heat over here, which is the gas flow in this case, to make sure it doesn't go over the edge. Come on. This game goes on for a couple of minutes, and eventually that foam disappears, and then you can have it set at a nice rolling boil and start adding the hops. The issue we're running into here is that the boiling is what causes the foam, but the boiling is also what eventually gets rid of the foam. That looks good. It's not foaming up anymore, and as long as the surface of the wort is moving around, you've got a good boil going. You don't have to set the heat so high that you have waves you could surf on. Just as long as the surface is moving, you're boiling, and it's good. So now I'm going to throw the hops in. I use pellet hops mostly. And even using pellet hops, I put them in this mesh bag. This is actually a paint strainer bag that I got at Lowe's. They end up being a little bit cheaper than the bags you can buy at the homebrew shops. Okay, the hops are in. I use this splatter screen not to keep any wort or foam from coming out, but to keep any bugs or leaves from going in. And I leave the edge of that strainer bag hanging out, so when I add more hops I can just pull it out and add to this bag. So now the wort is boiling. Let me tell you about how I keep track of when it's time to add hops and other ingredients during the boil. I use an app called Homebrew Timer, which I like a lot because I came up with the idea for it and the design. My mother, who's a retired software programmer, did the programming, and we both contributed to testing. Even starting with the early stages of the test versions, I've been using this every time I brew. It gives notifications on your phone. If you use an Apple Watch, it throws the notifications to the watch as well. And it's just an easy way to keep track of when it's time to add ingredients while the wort is boiling. So go check it out. It's on the App Store. I think it's pretty good. I may be biased, but it is good. All right, so I'm taking the gravity reading for the pre-boil gravity. And it's not perfectly easy to see, but I'm calling that at 1.069. Now I'm ready to chill down the wort. I have one of these copper chillers and a garden hose adapter for my kitchen sink so I can run cold water through it. So I chilled the wort down to 70 degrees, and at the end of summer with the temperature of the tap water, that's probably as good as it's going to get, and that's fine with me. I don't have any temperature control on my fermenter anyway, so upper 60s to 70 is a good starting point. So just like measuring the pre-boil gravity, I took a half a cup of the finished wort out. Looks like a 1.074. It's kind of hard to see, but anyway, when I go to bottle the beer, I will take a gravity reading again. So this number and that one will help me figure out what the alcohol percentage is. And the temperature there was about 71 degrees, close enough to 72, which means I'll be adding 0.002. So the actual original gravity reading will be 1.076. Now I am siphoning the wort out of the boil kettle and into the fermenter. As you probably guessed, yes, I sprayed down the tube with sanitizing solution inside and out. As a general rule of thumb, pretty much anything that you think is going to come into contact with the wort after the boil, sanitize it. And in just a couple minutes, all of this wort will be in this bucket. Okay, now it's time to put the yeast into the beer. Usually what I do the night before is after I eat dinner, I make the yeast starter, which means it's sitting for about 16 or 17 hours before I actually dump it into the fermenter. You can see the bubbles coming up there. That means the yeast is active, which is good. I just dump the whole thing in. I know some people will decant it so they're just getting the yeast, but I have no problem throwing all the liquid in there with it. All right. Put sanitizing solution in the airlock. And then just pop it into the cover. And that's it. Good to go. So that's it for brew day. I still have some stuff to clean up behind me here. But the beer is good to go. It should probably be done fermenting in about a week. I usually like to let it sit for another week after that before I add gelatin in to help clarify it. And then a week after that, I'll bottle it. So 3 weeks from today, or around about there, I should be bottling that double IPA. And I'll follow up and see if it turns out good. This is about 32 hours after dumping the yeast into the wort. And as you can see here, the carbon dioxide is bubbling out pretty consistently, which means fermentation is going well.